It's a suspended timber floor, so like the whole building has no concrete except for the footings for the piles. And I wanted to stay away from thermomass and actually just go like with a approach that is very close to New Zealand, making it way more efficient than it currently is.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. You can also check out our Reimagined Buildings YouTube channel for some great inspiration for both building new or renovating. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How's it going, Zach?
It's going great. Super beautiful here. It's been a great summer so far. Not to rub it in.
I believe I heard someone on the radio this morning talking about mental health and weather, and the fact
which is a topic near and dear to us in Seattle.
Oh my gosh! I think they were saying there have been 2 days of sunshine in July for Auckland. In that flavour, it is currently raining and very grey outside. Although New Zealand is pretty happy today, as we're recording this. The Women's Football World Cup literally kicked off in Auckland last night, and New Zealand came out firing with a fantastic game against Norway, which is very exciting to watch.
That's so cool. Yeah, congrats.
Yeah, so no doubt by the time this comes out, there'll be lots more results, and who knows where we'll be at. But just being in a large crowd like that, and watching a national team compete against another team, and and families and people celebrating was very, very cool. It was a great night out. All round, really, which was a very nice celebration.
I can't wait to catch some games. The U.S. Women's National Team is captained, I believe, this year by Megan Rapinoe, and she's just announced her retirement after this season. She has been a stalwart of the Seattle Reign, now known as OL Reign, the women's soccer club here in Seattle. So she's quite the star for us here. So it'll be fun. There
were certainly a few. Yeah, even though this was a New Zealand Norway game, there was certainly, I noticed a few US tracksuits around the place, and heard a few accents in the crowd. So I think a reasonable number of people have made their way or use this as an excuse to come and visit us here in New Zealand, which is great.
Fun stuff.
All right. Got a fun interview this week. I caught up with Carolin Friese, who's an architect based just out of Queenstown, and she lives in her own passive house. So we'll dive into that shortly. But we've got some people to thank first.
Indeed. So a big thank you to all the folks who make the Passive House Accelerator possible and the podcast happen. So thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel, Minitair, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks too to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Great. All right. Now, Carolin is she's an architect based in, or an architectural designer, I should say, based in Queenstown, or just out of Queenstown, with a strong passion for sustainable and energy efficient homes since she's been working in New Zealand for a good while now, and actually became a passive house designer while living here in New Zealand, despite growing up in Germany. We'll talk a little bit about that influence of growing up in Germany, where she did train as a designer and started out with a bit of an interest in engineering, but we've come across a few people like that, where they sort of grown up with that experience and haven't necessarily gone all the way to passive house in Germany, but it certainly influenced their expectation of what a house should be like and how it should perform, which is contrary to what a lot of people find when they come here and live in a house in New Zealand. So enjoy. This is my chat with Carolin from Carolin Friese Architecture. Hey, well, thank you, Carolin, for joining us. Pleasure to talk with you. Whereabouts are you in the world, for those that don't know your part of the world?
Well, I am in Queenstown, in the beautiful little town in the South Island of New Zealand, which is we're just facing winter at the moment, with very little snow, unfortunately, for me being a ski enthusiast.
Yeah.
It's part of the reasons I moved here from Germany originally.
Are you right in Queenstown, or are you?
I'm probably 10 minutes out of Queenstown towards Glenorchy way, more in the rural area with not many neighbours, which is quite nice for a change.
Yeah. And so when did you come to New Zealand?
12 years ago. It feels like time is flying. It doesn't, if someone asked me, I probably would say it's only 4 years ago. But it's been quite a long time now. I studied architecture in Germany, and finished my bachelor degree over there, and decided to take a break between really, jumping into the working world. Did a bit of a traveling road trip through New Zealand, and ended up hanging out in Queenstown, mostly for mountain biking at the time.
Right.
I'd actually ended up doing quite a few races, like downhill races, in my first year.
Wow.
Being on a working holiday visa here.
That's a little bit different from architecture.
Yes, it is. I've got really hooked on the whole mountain biking and racing, and I ended up being in the newspaper in Dunedin as an international rider, joining their racing series.
Nice.
It's been a good time. And then spend most of winter working for a heli ski company here in Queenstown, ending up doing lots of skiing during that time too.
Uh-huh.
And that I met my partner at that time as well. And that kind of just all fell into place, and it made me really want to stay and explore New Zealand more, and see what it has to offer.
Yeah. Were you a registered architect already in Germany?
No, I finished uni, and the same as here in New Zealand, you have to do your uni stint and then have a few years work experience before you can get registered.
Right.
I skipped that after uni, and ended up applying for my first. I did a few internships in Germany, but my first real job was actually in Queenstown, with Mary Joad Architects. She's a really good friend of mine now. We met mountain biking. That's how you actually get jobs in Queenstown. That's been a really good. So she was a really good mentor for me to really ending up establishing my own practice.
What was your impression about New Zealand houses when you first arrived?
It's cold. I remember that. when I was sort of Skyping with my parents at the time, and they were obviously on face-to-face conversations, and they were just astonished by the fact that I was wearing a puffer jacket indoors and like talking to them, and just being generally a little bit gobsmacked by the whole housing stock, especially in a ski town like Queenstown, where you sort of expect, highly insulated buildings to sort of combat the weather. Because my parents were generally always been into, high quality building. They built their own house when I was 3 years old, with sort of at the time sort of state of the art windows and some interesting insulating block work. And it really, like, my dad has sort of helped building it, and so did my granddad. And so that really sort of set me off in this direction of wanting to become an architect and wanting to sort of be involved in sort of, buildings and also like the beauty you can create, as in from a design perspective, like in that area. Interestingly enough, though, when I started uni at like architecture, I actually signed up for structural engineering as well. So the first year I actually studied both, because I couldn't quite decide. Like, I sort of felt like I was really interested in like structural componentry of buildings, as well as sort of, the design part of it. And I felt architecture wasn't really covering that enough.
Right.
And I had to, and eventually like settle on one. It was pretty intense to be trying to study both at the same time.
Yeah. How I'm interested in the style, because you've got a passive house now that you're living in. Yes. How would you describe the style of that home?
As in structurally, or
just the aesthetic and the look of it.
I think like I was always inspired by sort of like the alpine cabins in Europe, like sort of dark, moody wood, sort of, like you're enclosed in the building. I feel like in Queenstown, so the general architecture is sort of quite a lot of glass, which is sort of preventing the idea of being actually enclosed in a building and sort of feeling like comfort and sort of security by that. So I try to sort of establish, we're still having reasonably big glass doors and areas in the building, but in general, I try to actually create quite a bit of wall space as well. So you had like space for art and space for feeling actually enclosed in your building, which sort of passive house is supporting that idea, I guess. Like you're trying to sort of mitigate the need for light and sun and sort of views with your thermal performance, since windows are still sort of considered the weakest element in your wall, from a performance point of view.
I mean, Queenstown's such a scenic place that I guess people want to maximize that, because it's all about the view. Hence, and I find that as well. Sometimes it's almost lazy design to just make the windows bigger rather than framing that view in a well-placed window.
Yes, I agree. I feel like I'm quite into like picture windows where you sort of used your window as your artwork, instead of sort of having the whole wall glass, and then you sort of get also lost in what you're supposed to look at.
Right.
Since in Queenstown, our section is we're fully forested, so we've got lots of trees around us, but we've got sort of view shafts towards the mountains as well as the lake. And I try to sort of capture that in certain ways, so you actually get like still surprised when you walk around the corner, or when you go into a new room, you actually get new views that you didn't experience in a different room before. And I find that I prefer that often over being sort of having everything delivered on a plate. And then I kind of often wonder, like, well, if you go outside, you've got that same view. So like, why would you then want to be inside?
Yeah. I'm also interested in your material selection, because that seems to me not very European with the metal cladding. What was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, I think the metal cladding sort of actually derived of the fact that I wanted to use a relatively maintenance-free product, and also sort of a product that was lending itself for my structural approach, because I think a lot of people actually don't understand, depending on what cladding you use, you actually needing either way more fixings or way more like studs or dwangs or like actual timber componentry in your walls to sort of allow for that cladding. Vertical corrugate is actually a super simple material, because it's sort of with the corrugated also ventilates the cavity on its own. You don't need castellated battens and all this kind of stuff. So like basically with your cladding selection, you have quite a lot of ripple effects on your thermal envelope, which I think gets underestimated in a lot of cases.
That's really relevant for a lot of people. There's a big discussion going on about the excessive amount of timber in framing, because that takes up space that would otherwise be used for insulation. And quite often the reason we hear as that all that extra timber being there is not structural, it's fixings for weatherboards or whatever the cladding is. So that does have real impact on the overall performance of the building. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of laziness in that design as well, but it definitely has an impact.
Yeah, I think what since I'm personally quite interested in structure, so I guess I'm a designer who also considers structure and doesn't just let that happen sort of ungoverned by an engineer. So like I've basically on this house, I worked quite closely with my engineer together to achieve like a envelope that has very little timber content. We ended up, I would probably say we're likely to be the first in New Zealand who have managed to have no lintels over your windows, or no traditional lintels over your windows and doors. So, and then some of our windows are 3.6 meters wide. We're having just like a top plate over them, like a 45 or 90, depending on top plate. So there's no, like, normally you'd expect like a 300 to 400 mil lintel over such opening. In our case, we actually ended up engineering all of that out and having our lintels in the roof space as a boundary joist or as a boundary rafter. So it's been actually super special. And I think that was when we had the open home here, a lot of people have been really interested in the idea of actually designing smarter when it comes to like your wall and roof construction. We also managed to eliminate any. So we've got a mezzanine floor, or like a second level in our house. So we ended up eliminating the top and bottom plates at mid-floor level. So all our studs are continuously running from ground floor all the way to the roof. In the high ends, they are spanning over 6 meters with no dwangs, no lintels, and no top and bottom plates at the midpoint. Which is a very, I guess, unique approach. And I guess my inspiration came a little bit from the fact that I looked at SIP panels and how the timber content of those is often quite little, but we seem to not be able to replicate that idea with normal stick framing. And that was sort of my house is sort of like a trial project to explore the idea of eliminating timber, and all the design decisions have been based on on the timber framing contents. So, same with the cladding. the design intentions behind that were based on eliminating timber content in your walls. And same with, I guess, with a service cavity, sort of eliminated fixing points for the jib within your thermal envelope. And, all those ripple-on effects were I sort of explored in this as a example to hopefully roll out on more and more projects if possible.
Sounds like that structural engineering thinking has followed you through to your practice today.
Yeah, I reckon so. I think I'm still quite passionate about structure and actually make this more efficient and think about it at the start rather than having to incorporate lots of steel or to make up for your relatively poor design decisions at the start if you haven't considered certain things.
What's the floor in your in that house?
It's a suspended timber floor, so like the whole building has no concrete except for the footings for the piles. That was one of the other ideas that I kind of wanted to stay away from thermal mass and actually just go like with a approach that is very close to New Zealand standard, like the New Zealand 3604 timber building standard, but actually making it way more efficient than it currently is.
And do you know what implication that had on cost for the foundation, particularly in your location? Was it more or less or about the same to go timber?
I think when you talk to QSs, like they seem to sort of think it's probably by the time you spend the labor or the labor cost for, doing timber framed floorings on piles versus a concrete slab, it sort of probably works out similar. In our case, we wanted to be higher. Our section is slightly sloping, right, and we wanted to be a bit higher off the ground, just to get as much sun in winter as we possibly can, because we are surrounded by mountains and trees, and so our sun hours in winters are quite small.
The other advantages I've seen from suspended timber floor is it's just easier to connect completely to the wall, whereas if you have a concrete slab, doing that without a basement, as we don't do basements in New Zealand typically, it's quite hard to achieve a complete thermal connection there without a thermal break or having a some sort of issue with conductivity.
Yes, I agree. And I think in Queenstown, where everyone wants floor to ceiling windows and doors, you're facing that problem quite a lot, where you are connecting a timber to a concrete slab edge. It's sort of always a very weak point. It's difficult to detail. It's difficult to execute. So I guess I also wanted to stay away from that, and timber being better in regards to conductivity than concrete. You're always having a win doing a timber floor. Yeah.
Now you mentioned the open day. Sounds like you had quite a lot of interest, and you're not, as you say, you're not right in the middle of Queenstown. People definitely had to travel to your house to come and visit. But how many people do you think you got through?
I think I had I was blown away by the response. We've probably had about over 100 people come through. It was a lot more than I expected and sort of prepared for, but it was amazing. It was just great to see everyone being very excited about, building better and sort of, adopting, thermal modeling techniques and trying to look at outside the box, really. Yeah.
And was it a nice cold day outside during?
It was miserable. We've been in the fog. It was a great day to have an open day. It was cold and miserable. It was actually really saying that because I've actually found that even though sort of I knew from going to the Passive House conferences and sort of how I've grown up in Germany with, buildings that are actually warm when you enter them. Even though I knew the theory behind it and I knew, the expected outcome to actually live in a passive house has blown my mind. And it's we actually had to change all our duvet covers and everything because we were way too hot.
Right.
Like actually your body had to adjust to the fact that it is continuously hot or warm in the house.
Nice.
Um,
It's interesting that you grew up, did your training in Germany, but didn't do passive house there, but were surrounded by buildings that were just built closer to that standard. Did you what was your knowledge of passive house when you were in Germany?
I think passive house, it was a thing. It was sort of, commonly known. I think the building code in Germany is definitely a lot higher or like a lot closer to sort of passive house than the New Zealand one. So I guess in university, well, the uni I studied at was very design based. So I think you would probably been more exposed to that if you had been going to a bit more technical based uni when it comes to studying architecture.
Right.
But in general, I think it was sort of, you actually have to calculate the dew point and stuff like that when you apply for building consent over there. So it's sort of, I think we're still a little bit away from that for that to happen.
Definitely. I mean, we're only just starting to educate people about how to do that now, and still a little way from requiring FRSI calculations and dew point calculations. So yeah, we certainly have a long way to go, but having examples like yours is going to definitely help accelerate that. Where to from here? So you've got your home, which is do you have it as a place where you can bring potential clients generally, or because it is your own home, is it a sort of home as well?
I do like showing it to people or clients in general. My office, I've got a little studio on the section that is my office, to be able to actually walk out and go to work and come back home. In general, I do like using this as an example because it makes a difference if people actually experience like a building and what it feels like and how quiet it is as well. I mean, we are not in a very noisy suburb as such, but you're still completely cutting out any road noise or any sort of noise from parties in the neighborhood and anything like that. So it's got so many different aspects that you sort of explore and discover while you live in it.
Yeah. So what's on the cards for you now? Where do you want to take your practice in the next few years?
I guess I sort of been working over the last couple of years already on various passive house projects. I guess a few of them unfortunately stalled because of COVID at the time. But in general, I'm kind of just really looking forward to, designing more and more energy efficient buildings and using like the passive house planning software to actually in general calculate like the thermal performance of each building I'm sort of designing, and then basically have a means to discuss with clients what improvements would have which benefit, because it is often quite interesting to see whether like if you don't go all the way passive house, whether you go airtight or whether you improve your windows. Certain buildings suit certain improvements better, and you can sort of really explore that with the software, which I find amazing as a tool to sort of quantify your spendings and rewards really.
Awesome. Where's the best place for people to find you?
Just on my website, really. It's just cf-architecture.co.nz. That's probably the best spot. And I guess for the next open home, I've been approached by the WOW conference or summit that's going to happen in October. I'll be doing another tour for building professionals as well as the general public. Sort of, I think, end of October. It's when it's scheduled. There'll be, I guess, some more media exposure with that.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to that. So, yeah, I'm hoping to get into. I think one of the other things I really love, and I sort of experienced when I was doing all the talks over the weekend with the open home, that I actually wouldn't mind doing some lecturing in universities or something along the lines of that. I'd that would be something that interests me.
Great. We'll put that out there, and I think it's great having those events and the opportunity to talk to a wider audience, not just the people who already know about Passive House, but get other people just from the general building industry, because they're really the people here that need to experience what you've created and feel what it's like inside. Yeah,
I agree. Like, I think I reckon like the changes to the building industry would have to actually come from the clients more so than from the building regulations. It's usually like a demand thing, and like the more and more people I find are really interested in healthy buildings for their children. And if that's a good driver, then we should sort of, try and help and promote that. Because it is, I reckon, a really big thing. Like when I look around, how getting sick is probably the other big benefit of living in a passive house. I don't think I've been sick for over a year now. So, I mean, like whether you can really like 100% credit that to the passive house or not, but I feel like the difference is definitely there. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, well done. I know it's a big job doing any passive house, but it's also a big job doing your own house and running a practice at the same time. And great to see that there has been really positive interest and people coming and seeing what you've created there. So all the best, and we'll keep in touch. And that was Carolin Friese, who you can find at cf-architecture.co.nz. And she's also on LinkedIn and a few places, social media around the place as well. What do you think, Zach?
Well, she made Queenstown sound like a really great place to live. I'll say that.
The place to go mountain biking.
Yeah, exactly. All this mountain biking and heliskiing and stuff. That's pretty amazing. And she's clearly quite the extreme sports athlete as well.
Yeah, well, it does have a lot going for it in that part of the world, not just Queenstown itself, but the Queenstown Lakes region. A stunning, world-renowned great walks very close to there at the end of the road. You got down at Te Anau as the kickoff point to a number of incredible walks, and a lot of people do a day trip, try and get down to Milford Sound, and then going the other way, you've got up and over to Wanaka and some amazing trails through there. So when it's not snowing and the skis are out, there are some pretty incredible mountain bike trails and bushwalks, tramping, everything. So much to go, so much to do down there, and it's pretty stunning scenery, as we've mentioned multiple times, I think already. Some of those landscapes will be very familiar to people who have watched any Lord of the Rings. So it's a pretty amazing place.
So you said tramping, that's a thing?
Well, I'm kind of bilingual. In Australia, that would be hiking. In New Zealand, it would be tramping. No, it would be bushwalking in Australia. I'm getting my colloquialisms all mixed up. So tramping, hiking, bushwalking.
Okay, got it.
The same.
Right. And I gobsmacked was the word she used in describing the housing stock in New Zealand. When I was just reminded. Of course, I'm always reminded about this when we hear from designers from New Zealand, and builders. It also is a good reminder of just that even when. So I was just thinking about Germany. and just the fact that the basis, the kind of the floor of sort of building is so much higher than other places in the world. I think that there's currently, I think we're just speaking with somebody who was talking about how frustrating it was this week's episode of the podcast, how frustrating it is to see that Passive House hasn't taken off more recently in Germany itself. It's also instructive to remember that the delta between the standard practice of building in Germany and Passive House is a good deal smaller than elsewhere in the world.
Yeah. So if we were building houses too close to the normal everyday standard that you'd expect in somewhere like Germany, then we'd be a lot better off.
Right.
The benefit of having someone like Carolin doing a house like her own and opening it up is that people can then go to it on a cold, wet day and feel what a house should look like, because so few people have had that experience. They've had the opposite of growing up in a house, and the expectation is that it's cold, and it's at best you can only warm up one room and then dash off to the bedroom, and maybe you're lucky enough to have an electric blanket to stay warm.
Right.
But that's not a way to live, but it is the way that so many people do live. Mm-hmm. And then we wonder why we have such high rates of asthma and respiratory disease and just people not enjoying their home, and that affects the rest of their life. So we do need a shift in mindset, and Passive House is definitely an avenue to achieving that, particularly with these open days and having more examples of people seeing that in action. Yeah. And I like the architectural flair that Carolin gives as well. It's not a I'll put some photos up and some links. You can have a look. But it's a fairly modest house, but it's got its own beauty, and it doesn't have to be a huge mansion, but it just performs really well and looks after people, and I really like that concept of shelter and a home to sort of protect you and look after you and really to shelter you from the elements, because that is what it should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she talked about feeling enclosed in a building, and it was also cool to hear her reflection about how in Queenstown region you feel enclosed by trees as well, and so that parallel of the view shafts that sometimes will present themselves as you're exploring the area, and suddenly you see a view of a mountain or some other natural feature, and that she's approaching design of houses in a similar way, and really thinking of these views as framed as pieces of art, as opposed to just having walls of glass everywhere. There's a great photo on her website. I assume it's of her house, maybe it's a different house, but it shows a great example of that kind of framing of this really cool, beautiful mountain that's framed by this long rectangular window in a bedroom. It's really nice.
In stark contrast to that, I'm involved in judging for some other industry awards at the moment, and that entails going around looking at some houses that are very much not passive houses. And it's something that I observe fairly regularly, where a sliding door gets put in, or a wall to a floor to ceiling window gets put in. Now, in this particular case, I looked at a house, and it was the one of the upper stories with no balcony on the outside, but the glazing was a sliding door.
And wow,
and what
exciting.
that meant was there was
hang gliding or something?
On the inside of that door is a glass balustrade. So, and I've seen this before. There's a balustrade in front of a sliding door, and I was showing this to a colleague, and they said, "Why is there a door up there?"
Yeah.
And I said, it's stupid because people's feet don't appreciate the view. And I get why architects do it. I think it's got to do with just having more glazing when you've got a fairly limited space in sort of apartment buildings. But I do think there is a laziness to that, of just chucking in a large area of glass so that you're letting more light in and making the room appear bigger maybe, and ticking a box to ensure that you've got an adequate area of natural daylight, but with no thought at all as to how that light is affecting the room and how the view out of that window is impacting the experience of the people inside the building. And what Carolin's done with hers, and you can see this in some of the photos where it just frames the view beautifully, and I think enhances the view, and good architects will do that really, really well. And it goes hand in hand with good thermal design, because you're limiting the amount of losses, and also in some instances controlling the amount of excessive solar gain, which can also be problematic in our warmer climates as well. So thinking about the placement and the size of windows, I think is the sign of a really good architect, and I see it very often when architects or designers just get a bit lazy and slap in larger windows unnecessarily.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, definitely. And it does kind of harmonize so well with passive design.
And I don't think it doesn't have to detract from the idea of, we talk about indoor outdoor flow and wanting to be able to open up the house. And again, this Carolin's example has this beautiful big deck and open areas that you can enjoy when you want to, but it's not every single aspect has to have floor to ceiling windows on.
Right. Yeah, she's being thoughtful about that, and she was very clear about like having a variety of different experiences, but making sure that there were some spaces that made you feel kind of sheltered and enclosed.
Yeah,
and cozy. She also talked to, it was really interesting to hear about the structural engineering background and kind of her thinking about structure all the time, and how she's using that to simplify and sometimes eliminate elements, like eliminating some lintels and things.
Yeah.
And I think that also extended to her using very little concrete in this house, and just the footings. And that's it's probably one of the more impactful embodied carbon reduction moves you can make.
Absolutely.
In a house.
Yeah. I mean, we're doing more and more analysis now of life cycle assessment, and particularly embodied carbon, and certainly concrete slab tends to be one of the largest contributors to that. And there's a kind of default assumption that slabs are easiest. There's a perception that they're cheapest when you consider all the labor. And there's also, I think, a perception that they're better performing. But it's not necessarily the case. And I've seen the complexities and so much time getting spent trying to figure out how to connect the edge insulation of a concrete slab to the walls to reduce the thermal bridge. It's actually easier to do that on a suspended timber floor, just by how that detail works out. So a lot of people who are going down a passive house route, if they're designing from scratch, and if they're particularly interested in overall sustainability and lower carbon, they tend to land at a non-concrete slab and go with a suspended timber floor. certainly what I would probably lean towards, depending on the site selection as well. There are some sites that lend themselves more to concrete because of course we don't tend to do basements in New Zealand, and that's one of the key differences I think with North America, where you'd expect to go down before you go up, where we just don't do that in this part of the world.
So we talked a little bit about the different kind of delta between the code and passive house between New Zealand and Germany. But regardless, she grew up in buildings in Germany, but regardless, when she described living in a passive house, she says, to actually live in a passive house has blown my mind. So there's clear, it's a different level. Yeah, exactly. That was like, I heard that. It's like, okay, there's the pull quote for the episode right there.
Totally. Yeah. And I've we've heard that from other people, like Joe Lyth, who's an architect, lives here in Auckland now, got his family in his own passive house that he designed, and you can just tell he just loves talking about it. And the proof is definitely in that lived experience.
Right. And to that point, the 100 people for the open days, that's out in the sticks, as we say in the Northwest.
There's some beautiful sticks. You should, if you do venture down this way, invite anyone down to certainly go and have a trip down to Queenstown. There's a lot of passive house friendly people down there, and I'm sure they'd be very willing to show people around.
That's great.
Awesome. You're taking a bit of a break at the moment, events wise.
That's right. The Passive House Accelerator will take August off for its live programming and will return the first Wednesday of September, or first Thursday of September if you're in New Zealand, to fire the Passive House Accelerator live Zoom meetings back up. In the meantime, we'll be publishing a new podcast episode every week, and also new videos on the Reimagine Buildings channel. So there's plenty of stuff to take in passive house wise during that time. But we are taking a little break on the live show, which is nice. It gives everybody a chance to recharge, and also for us to get some great cool plans together for the fall and the winter and the spring of next year. Yeah.
Don't forget to definitely check out those videos. And I am seeing some people dropping that the intro to Passive House into their websites, which is fantastic. Yay. And so that is available for use if you are updating your website and you want to tell your clients or tell people what Passive House is from a starting point. Then feel free to embed a couple of those videos or link to the Reimagine website, because there's some great resources there to bring people up to speed fairly quickly. We'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.